Once again, Booktok is ruining literature is a trending topic, so
I am once again asking
for your attention while I go on various tangents about it for the next 20 minutes or so. I didn't just choose this topic because this video is sponsored by Squarespace, which it is, and I'm hoping it'll get lots of views, which I do. The main reason I wanted to add my 2 cents to this conversation is that although it is very tempting to make fun of grown women who are thirsting over fictional men on the internet, if literature is indeed dying, the causes are probably a little bit more complex than made-up interspecies alien sex. And before I get into that, I want to clarify that I'm not a huge Booktok fan myself. This one guy had to unsubscribe from my channel altogether because of how capital letters negative I am. And in his defense, I have been known to make the occasional critical video about the online book community. I've talked about Booktok and consumerism and how I think reading aesthetics are silly and celebrity book clubs are cash grabs. And more recently, I had a go at the Goodreads reading challenge and the inexplicable desire to read 300,000 books every year. Turns out a lot of my subscribers are actually on Goodreads, so that one didn't really turn out that well. What I'm trying to say is that I'm not usually in the habit of defending Booktok. And actually, I don't think that's what this video is. I'm not looking to defend anything, but I would like to bring some nuance to the conversation because over the past few months, there have been a number of Booktok bad, Booktok ruining literature type of videos popping off, and I have a few issues with them. One issue, actually, which is that they all focus almost exclusively on criticizing / goofing on the spicy and romance book community on Booktok, often with sensationalist titles and headlines like "Booktok is a fever dream," "Everything wrong with Booktok," "The terrible world of Booktok needs to be stopped," "Booktok is getting worse," and my personal favorite, "Booktok brain rot and why it's okay to be a hater," which is genuinely my favorite. I think it's a great video. It's from the creator Alicia, not Alicia, I hope I'm saying that right, who actually put a lot of effort into researching and articulating her arguments, and the editing is also really cool. She goes to great lengths to discuss the overconsumption aspect of Booktok, authors and publishers' over-reliance on tropes for book marketing, as well as the mislabeling of sexually explicit books as YA, because they all have these silly cartoon covers, all of which, again, are more than valid pieces of criticism. This is not to say, however, that I don't take issue with any of the arguments in that video. Alicia, like pretty much everyone else on the internet right now, also criticizes the performative aspect of Booktok, which, look, I'm not going to sit here and try to convince you that every single picture of a book shared on the internet was posted because the person was so touched by what they read that they simply had to share the good news with the world that such literature exists. I always share this picture here as an example of content about books that clearly has nothing to do with the book itself. But if you wanted to take that argument to an extreme, you could argue that everything that exists on social media is performance, by virtue of the fact that it is information about oneself that is made for the consumption of other people. Your gym selfies are performative. The picture of that one cake that you baked that one time is also performative. That doesn't mean that you went to the gym or baked a cake just for the picture though, does it? The same reasoning applies to content about books. There's a high chance that some reading took place before or after the picture was taken. When it comes to TikTok's seemingly unescapable desire to group media and consumer products into internet aesthetics, however, there's obviously much to criticize. Primarily the sad reality that we seem to have become unable to construct a stable sense of self through something other than mindless consumption. A great video about this topic that I've recommended in the past is this one by Alice Capel, and she also writes about this topic in her book Collapse Feminism, which I also recommend. I would like to add though that although I don't necessarily recommend turning a hobby into your entire personality via social media aesthetics, I think that a lot of people who engage in analyses of internet trends often forget that there's a high chance that the person behind that one aesthetic Instagram account is probably a teenager going through a phase. And I mean this in the least condescending way possible. A phase in the sense that they're just trying things out and trying to figure out who they are and what they like. I haven't really seen many people talk about the way in which the internet collapses various age demographics into one. Almost any online community right now is basically 14-year-olds arguing with 40-year-olds in the comments comments, both thinking that they're talking to their peers, which is why I'm not really a proponent of the let people enjoy things attitude to media consumption. But I do think that there is some room for letting people grow out of things in their own time. When it comes to Booktok specifically, that might look like just allowing people to develop a more discriminating reading taste gradually rather than just flooding their comment section with insults and think pieces about how they're not a real reader and they should just stop pretending. Because ultimately, this seems to be the problem. The whole Booktok issue to me seems to stem from the tension between a group of people who see themselves as sophisticated, serious readers who also feel like women reading smut on Booktok are somehow usurping their status as the resident internet intellectuals.
I saw someone say that people who enjoy Colleen Hoover are the people who stopped reading in middle school, back when adults would say all reading is good reading. They've carried this mindset with them as they've gotten older and reading has become trendy again. Now they have this outward behavior of intellectualism, but they don't care about what's actually in the book in their hands.
I've seen a depressing amount of people online and off make this argument. And first of all, no one with the most basic knowledge of literature is going to see somebody holding a book with this cover and think, that's an intellectual right there. Come on. And second, why is it so important to determine who is an intellectual online and who isn't? A question we will attempt to answer right after I tell you about today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one website platform which allows you to create sleek, professional-looking websites in a matter of clicks. If you've seen any of my recent videos and you have not skipped the ad read, first of all, thank you so much. That's very sweet of you. You'll know that I've been putting together a website for myself where I can gather links to all the different types of work that I do, and that actually looks nice. And the Squarespace Blueprint, which is their new guided design system that offers a whole bunch of different templates to choose from, has made the whole process so easy for me. And that's the main thing that I appreciate about Squarespace, I think. It's just so easy. It has inbuilt payment tools like credit and debit card, Apple Pay, and buy now, pay later options in case you have goods and services that you want to sell directly off of your website. And it also has optimized SEO tools to help with marketing and discoverability as well. So if you've been thinking of getting a website for yourself and were considering giving Squarespace a try, go to squarespace.com/according to Alina to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now back to us and the current strange obsession to prove oneself as a real reader on the internet, which is not only a huge thing on social media right now, but it is also very gendered in this way where even when audiences of young women are seen to interact with books that are generally considered literary classics, they still get mocked or accused of just posing with those books to project intelligence, which is interesting when you consider that most of the criticism that Booktok gets is that it promotes genres of literature which are considered lowbrow. I'm talking romance, fantasy, or the combination between the two, the so-called romantasy. I've seen a number of personal essays and think pieces going around at the moment from people arguing that the quality of the books that get popular on TikTok reflects the nature of the app itself. Madison Huizinga writes on Substack, "The subject matter of popular Booktok books is also of note, as it mirrors the type of content that succeeds on social media itself, digestible and sensational. Similar to the palatable short-form content that succeeds on apps like TikTok, Booktok books of the YA variety often contain predictable storylines that are easy for readers to swallow. We can begin the book confidently, knowing that the enemies will turn into lovers and that the fake dating will turn into real dating. All will be tied up with a neat bow." The thing about this quote that I just read is that as a writer myself, I love the juxtaposition between TikTok as an app for short form and presumably superficial content and surface level plot-driven writing. It's great imagery, it's neat, it's satisfying, it's evocative, it gets your point across. But I feel compelled to point out that there are people discussing far more challenging books, both on Booktok and elsewhere on social media, and also getting a lot of engagement for that content. And the fact that that type of content doesn't come up on your For You page doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It's always interesting to me when people take the fact that their For You page page is full of people talking about smut as indication of the fact that people on Booktok only read smut, instead of coming to the far more reasonable conclusion that algorithmic media distribution shows people things that is likely to get a reaction out of them, like, I don't know, outrage, so that you spend more time on the app either consuming content or making your own content, complaining about what you just saw. You can just stop interacting with that content and instead use the search bar to look for content that you actually care about. Put in the words, I promise you the content will be there. The main thrust of Madison's Substack is that Booktok is dampening art and literature because it reduces it to its main tropes and themes. An argument which I have seen going around a lot and which I agree with, particularly when it comes to the genres already mentioned like romance, fantasy, romantasy. On TikTok, there has been a rise in the so-called tropeification of writing, which by the looks of it is only going to get worse. There is a noticeable supply and demand relationship between the books that are currently viral on TikTok and the books that get huge publishing deals and big marketing budgets right now. I don't want to minimize the potential impact of this by any means, but something that people typically leave out of the conversation here is that the so-called tropeification that is taking over Booktok is really taking over genre fiction, a type of literature that is and has always been formulaic and plot-driven. Lee Child, Robert Ludlum, James Patterson have been writing the same book over and over for decades, and is probably why all of their books continue to be bestsellers. These writers are good at what they do, and their readers want to know what they're going to get before they commit to a whole book. And this need to know exactly what you're getting is what, in my opinion, attracts many people to the romance genre as well. Which is why I'm so confused when people argue that there's a pretension for literariness from romance readers. I don't think anybody picks up an Emily Henry book thinking that they're about to interact with a piece of fine art. And I will caveat that statement with two things. First of all, the nature of social media is such that everything is a hyperbole nowadays. So chances are that you will happen upon a review of a romance book where the reviewer is talking about how the book was amazing and life-changing and all of these other things. I've seen this happen in the literary sphere as well. It happened to me recently, and I don't know what to tell you. It seems like when it comes to book recommendations online right now, not just on Booktok, but on Instagram and sometimes on YouTube too, every review is promising you a life-changing stories, and then you read the book and it's just an okay book. And this is not just a social media issue. I dare you to look at the quotes on the back cover of any book that you have recently bought and tell me that they're not just completely outside reality. I've been reading this short story collection recently, and out of the 4 back cover quotes, one of them calls it brilliant. A second calls it a more vague intimate, whatever that means. And then Dazed magazine calls it stunning. And I have to be honest, I'm not hating it. I did really enjoy one of the stories, but I wouldn't necessarily call myself stunned by any means. And I think this is a common experience with online reviews at the moment, where every single person is giving, oh my god, I'm obsessed vibes. It's not that the books are bad necessarily, it's just that you enter the reading experience with such unrealistic expectations because the hype. The second thing that I wanted to add as a caveat, especially when it comes to the romance and dark romance book community, is that there is a very loud minority of people who simply refuse to acknowledge any of the pitfall of the genre, particularly when it comes to books that deal with themes of kink and, in some cases, abuse. And then there's the Colleen Hoover fans, who are a category in themselves. They seem to have descended into this uncritical stan culture mindset where even the mildest criticism of these books tends to get people doxxed. It's important to keep in mind that these people exist and they are kind of pathetic and deserve to be criticized. However, I don't think this is enough reason for the spice moral panic that seems to have taken over the internet right now. Romance and erotica books are not proprietary of Booktok, nor do they represent the entirety of the online reading community. And most importantly, these genres are not inherently bad. I see far too much criticism of Booktok that is based solely on the fact that a lot of the books that go viral on there have explicit sex scenes in them. And I think the reason why we seem to be stuck in this circular conversation about it is that people are not interested in examining why these books are going viral in the first place. Why are they everywhere right now? Thank you for asking. I think there are two reasons. The first being that the spicy book community is, to many people, a safe space where they can, in some cases for the first time in their life, have shame-free conversations about sex. Which brings me to the second reason why I believe this is such a huge topic of conversation right now. To a lot of people, talking about sex is still hugely controversial. From what I've seen, the virality of the spicy book community is very similar to the virality of people like Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate, where you have 1 million people who love them and then 5 million people who hate them and keep writing op-eds about how bad they are. And regardless of which side of the argument you're on, we're all giving our clicks to the topic, thus making it bigger and bigger, until it snowballs into the current conversation where people refer to romance books as the end of the world. This is the end of the world. Not climate change, not the constant threat of nuclear warfare, but a shelf of books that are popular among young people on the internet. And I hope I've made it clear that I'm not saying that there aren't aspects of the spicy book community that deserve criticism. Primarily, again, the lack of distinction between adult and young adult audiences in the marketing of these books, as well as the lack of boundaries between age group demographics in the various online communities dedicated to smut. And just more generally, I think we should make it a rule that all the adults on the internet have a responsibility to make sure that the person they're talking to is also an adult, no matter what they're talking about. These are all things worth criticizing, but we need to find a way to do that without reverting to slut-shamey, misogynistic, right-wing talking points. Princess Weeks has a great video on media literacy in relation to a few current hot topics, including the spice community on Booktok. And you can watch that in your own time. I really recommend that you do. But I will play a couple of clips here because they articulate my own opinions very well.
For adults who are frustrated by what they see as an oversaturation of spice or sex in their book feeds, it is honestly up to you to diversify your own reading habits. There are so many local bookstores that offer different opportunities. As someone who works in one, the bookstores know different things. You have to look in different websites. Like if you go on Vulture in their book section, yes, there is some ACOTAR stuff, but there's also whole lists of other books to read that are coming out. And if people do decide that they only want to read smut, or smutty books or smutty fan fiction, that does not mean they have a porn addiction. Words mean things. And I feel like porn and sex addictions have become sort of joke addictions that people just feel comfortable throwing around as an insult or as a gotcha. But a porn addiction means you can't stop looking at porn or consuming it to the point where it interferes with every part of your daily life, because that's what an addiction is, okay? And when it comes down to it, some folks are just annoying, have bad tastes, and are really loud with their really annoying bad tastes. Thankfully, you can ignore them. This push to make enjoying sex and books a moral failing feels like moms of liberty from the other side. The same anti-sex moral policing that does not help anyone, but allows some people to feel superior by standards that they invented. You are not protecting teenagers by policing what adults do in adult spaces with other consenting adults. Critique the works that you think are mediocre or not good, but stop trying to, out the purity ring people with your sort of is there nothing out without smut? I mean, read Babel, girl. What are you talking about? Yellowface.
The porn addiction argument in particular is incredibly disingenuous, and on top of that, as old as time. In a video about the romance community I made at the end of last year, I talked about various pseudoscientific studies trying to draw links between the consumption of erotica and women's emotional and sexual well-being. I've seen this argument more and more recently, and it reminded me of a whole slew of articles that I found in 2011 about how romance books are impacting women's ability to discern between good and bad decisions with regards to their romantic lives. The articles were all based on the same essay written by Susan Quilliam, who is a relationship expert and who argued in the essay that although there was no conclusive evidence that romance novels affect women in any way, she still felt that they probably do. This NPR article explains how the essay was then misquoted as a piece of research instead of an essay by one leading publication, which then got misquoted by another leading publication, and the half-truth kind of spread across the internet for the rest of that year. So as you can see, this has been a conversation that has been going on for some time now, because romance and erotica as genres have been around for quite some time, and they have always been bestsellers. I find the idea that Booktok or lowbrow books that go viral on Booktok are ruining literature so annoying, because it's based on the idea that there was a time in the past when literature was flourishing. And I blame this on a mix between our tendency to romanticize the past and a survivorship bias. We go to a classic shelf in Barnes & Noble and we see banger after banger after banger, so we just imagine that all of the books written centuries ago were good. We think about the year 1923 when Ulysses, The Wasteland, and Beautiful and Damned came out, all classics in the same year. But you know what other book came out that year? Black Oxen. Don't worry, I hadn't heard about it before I looked it up either. But it was the #1 bestseller that year, despite having no particular literary merit and falling into obscurity almost immediately after. And the reason I bring all of this up is that I hope that with a little bit of critical thinking, maybe we can all arrive to the conclusion that perhaps sexy books on Booktok are not the end of humanity as we know it. And I realize just how condescending that sentence sounded. But the reason I phrased it that way is that people almost always invoke critical thinking, or lack thereof, as an excuse to slag off those horny idiot women on Booktok who can't seem to read a book if it doesn't have sex in it, to the point where it has become difficult to engage in meaningful criticism of the community, because it then seems to give people permission to continue to dogpile and go even further. I recently made a video about how the literary landscape is suffering because authors are expected to build online audiences and do their own marketing and PR, and not one, not two, but 3 people commented that the reason we're in this situation is because women have ruined literature. They didn't elaborate. A similar thing happened to Alicia. She made a second video in which she brings forth an addendum to her previous one, presumably because of the unhinged comments that her first one got. She says that in light of the response her video got, she felt like perhaps it lacked nuance because a lot of people were taking some of her statements out of context, particularly her statements about the romance genre and anti-intellectualism, to mean that everyone who enjoys romance must be a vapid sex addict. She also addresses the way in which people equate the concept of critical thinking with simply being a hater, and I'm going to let her say that last part.
Critical thinking has a lot of negative connotations around it because of the word critical, but it doesn't have to be all negative. Every piece of literature has nuance, and you can find the good and the bad. That is essential to critical thinking. It's not just pointing out every single thing that you find wrong with it and hating on it meaninglessly, because hating on something meaninglessly is also bad faith criticism. It's not actual critical thought. Bad faith criticism, for example, is when somebody watches my video, takes my words and says, "You're so right, people who read romance are stupid and we should be reverting back to the classics." Loud, incorrect buzzer sound. Mindlessly hating doesn't get us to a better place than where we are right now in this discourse, and I think we need to really stop with the classics elitism that we see going on when we talk about Booktok.
Another thing she does, which I really enjoy, is that she actually recommends Booktok content creators that she enjoys and who have brought value to her reading experience, which is something that I'd only ever seen Jack Edwards do in one of his videos. And this is the thing that gives me pause when I see people capitalize on the Booktok bad trend. A lot of YouTube creators have noticed that over the past 1.5 years, 2 years, the Booktok, particularly the spicy book community on Booktok, gets lots of views, especially when they're being mocked. So people have been making series out of reading problematic Booktok books and making fun of thirsty TikToks from the community. And some of them do preface their videos with a quick, no offense to anybody, if you enjoy these books, good on you, you do you type of disclaimer. But for the most part, these type of videos need Booktok, or at least the public perception of Booktok as a community, to remain this silly, outrageous place. They're not necessarily trying to raise awareness about something that has been going wrong behind the scenes on the Booktok community. On the contrary, they're banking on the fact that the general public already has a dislike of the Booktok community and that they will be jumping at the opportunity to join in on hating on the community with the video creator. So it's not in their interest to make a huge deal out of the fact that Booktok or the online book community is not a homogenous place. The more monolithic and triggering the concept of Booktok remains in the collective imaginary, the longer the people criticizing it can make videos about it, knowing that it's guaranteed to get them views. In her video, Booktok is Getting Worse, Chad opens by saying that she has been going through a stressful time, so stressful that she has not been able to actually write a script for a video. So she will be talking about Booktok instead.
Hey guys, I am stressed. So stressed that I haven't written a script for a video that's due in 5 days, but I still have to post a video in 5 days, so we're gonna do something right now. I don't know what it's gonna be, but it will be something. So have a seat, sit down, sit.
So we all agree, Booktok is an easy topic to goof on for 15 minutes and guaranteed to get lots of views. And I don't mean any hate to these creators. In fact, Chad's video was on my radar because I'm subscribed to her channel and I think her content is funny, and this video was no different. There are obviously aspects of the Booktok community that are ridiculous and easy to clown on. However, videos like these are perpetuating the viral idea that Booktok is ruining literature. Not to mention it's probably messing with your algorithms, thus reinforcing the idea that sexy books are everywhere when really your apps are just showing you things that you told them you want to see. But more importantly, in my opinion, the Booktok is ruining literature discourse is possibly distracting from things that might actually be ruining literature, like Amazon plotting to put all indie booksellers out of business, for example, or the fact that public funding cuts are pushing an increasing number of local governments to close public libraries, or the CEO of one of the big 5 publishing houses wanting to replace human staff with AI. All pretty serious things, but I guess those conversations are not as fun as hurling insults at women on the internet.